There comes a moment in life when pain doesn't just visit, it invades. It walks in uninvited, rips your soul wide open, and leaves you bleeding in silence while the world carries on unaware. And the cruelest part, the ones who did it walk away untouched, as if your suffering was just a passing event. But what if I told you heaven was watching? What if I told you that while they celebrated, God was already writing the beginning of their fall and the blueprint of your restoration? The soul, unlike the body, is not so easily violated. While our flesh may bruise and our hearts may ache from betrayal, the soul is a different terrain altogether, a realm designed to commune with the eternal, to reflect the image of its creator. When someone wounds us deeply and maliciously, it feels as though something sacred within has been torn. But what they attack is not always what they reach. They may slash at our dignity, insult our worth, and trample upon our innocence. But the soul, when guarded by divine truth, does not shatter like glass. It bends, it weeps, it mourns, but it remains intact in the hands of God. There is a tragic beauty in human vulnerability. We open our hearts to others with the risk that they may not handle us gently. We trust, we give, we love, and sometimes we are met with betrayal. In those moments, it seems as though the very core of who we are has been ripped open, exposed to the elements of cruelty and scorn. The pain is so deep it feels spiritual. But that feeling, that raw agony, is not proof that your soul has been destroyed. 'Tis proof that it is alive. Numbness is the death of the soul. Pain is the evidence of its stubborn persistence. What the enemy wants you to believe is that your identity has been altered by the trauma inflicted upon you, that somehow you are less than what you were. But this is the greatest lie of affliction, because pain, though it screams loudly, does not rewrite the truth of who you are. It simply calls your attention to wounds that God is already moving to heal. The soul can be scarred, but it cannot be stolen unless you hand it over. And you never did. Though they ripped your soul open, you did not surrender it. You are still in possession of your eternal self, even if it feels fractured. We must learn to separate the feelings of being broken from the reality of being ruined. They are not the same. There is no blade sharp enough, no word cruel enough, and no betrayal deep enough to change what God has called you. Others may seek to define you by what they did to you, but God defines you by what He placed within you before they ever had a chance to touch your life. That part of you, the divine breath, the eternal identity, the purpose stitched into your existence, is untouchable. And yet, we often confuse emotional destruction with spiritual destruction. They are not the same, though they often travel together. Emotional wounds scream louder. Spiritual wounds are quieter, deeper. But even there, healing is possible. What must be remembered is that pain is not proof of failure. You were not weak because you were hurt. You were not foolish because you trusted. The hurt you feel is not a reflection of your weakness, but a reflection of your capacity to feel, to hope, to live fully. That is not a flaw, that is a divine gift. There is also a temptation to believe that those who harmed us stole something eternal from us, that somehow we have lost our future, our joy, our light. But God is not a passive observer in your pain. He holds in His hands every thread they tried to tear away, and He is capable of weaving them back into something stronger, more beautiful, more resilient than what was before. The soul that has walked through fire and still clings to God has a depth that the untouched will never know. So yes, they tried to rip your soul open, but they failed. They only reached the surface. They may have wounded your heart, crushed your spirit for a season, and spoken words that echoed through your mind like a curse. But your soul is eternal. It belongs to no man, no trauma, no betrayal. It was made by God, and He has not left it. What they reached was your vulnerability. What they could never reach was your identity. And that is where your victory already resides. There is a kind of suffering that speaks only in silence. The kind where the world continues spinning, where the sun rises and sets, and yet something inside of you has stopped moving. You go about your days with a fractured spirit, not because you are weak, but because something deeply unjust was done to you, and no one seemed to notice. No apologies came, no justice arrived, no acknowledgement was offered. You wondered if anyone had truly seen what happened to you, if the betrayal, the loss, the emotional devastation was invisible even to heaven. But in truth, nothing escapes the eyes of God. There is no suffering so hidden that it is not already engraved upon His heart. Pain that is seen changes us, but pain that is unseen changes us even more. When you cry out in secret, when you sit in silence with a wound too complex for words, those moments do not vanish into emptiness. They rise, they echo, they are heard by the one who hears not just words, but hearts. You may not have had anyone around you who truly understood the depth of your agony, but God did. You may not have had someone to explain your H to, but God never required your explanation to validate your experience. He is not a passive observer. He is a divine witness, present even when all others have turned their eyes away. This witnessing is not cold observation. It is not the detached glance of a distant deity. It is the compassionate, attentive, and deeply invested gaze of a father who watches his child being mistreated and records every injustice, not for record-keeping alone, but for eventual restoration. He saw when you were lied to. He saw when you were used, when you were discarded, when your kindness was trampled as weakness. Every betrayal, every false smile, every covert act meant to crush your spirit was seen, weighed, and counted. What others called minor wounds, He recorded as violations of the sacred. When people justified their cruelty with clever arguments or hid behind excuses, God did not buy into their reasoning. He looked at your suffering through the lens of truth, and He called it what it was. He did not ask you to smile through it or to pretend it did not hurt. In fact, it was His Spirit that kept you from becoming numb, that kept the tears flowing, because even your grief was holy in His presence. There is a reason God is described as close to the broken-hearted. Not because He waits for us at the end of suffering, but because He enters it with us. He does not hover outside the storm, waiting for us to emerge. He steps into the storm with us. He did not merely observe the injustice done to you. He felt it. When they ripped your soul open, it wasn't just your heart that broke. Heaven grieved too. There is no such thing as a private pain in the kingdom of God. All pain touches eternity. All pain is accounted for. We often equate divine justice with immediate consequences. But God is not governed by the panic of time. He is patient, and His justice is precise. That does not mean He overlooks wrongdoing. It means He is measuring it. letting it ripen to fullness so that when he moves, there is no room left for confusion. What they did to you, they did in front of heaven. And heaven took notes not in anger alone, but with righteous intent to restore, redeem, and judge rightly. Even when you questioned if your suffering mattered, when you began to doubt whether you were foolish to hurt so deeply, God stood with you in unwavering compassion. You were never foolish to feel what was real. The ache in your chest, the knot in your stomach, the endless replay of wrongs done to you, none of it was small in his sight. In fact, the depth of your pain only revealed the depth of your humanity, which God cherishes. He is not ashamed of your sorrow. He does not rush it, ignore it, or belittle it. He holds it, absorbs it, and promises it will not be in vain. You are not forgotten. You are not unseen. Every tear you wept in isolation, every sleepless night where bitterness and confusion collided in your soul, he was there, and he remembers. Not so that you would be bound to the past forever, but so that your healing would not be shallow. What you suffered in silence will not be ignored by God. What you lost in the shadows will be repaid in the light. God is merciful. This is a truth we have heard since childhood. But mercy does not mean blindness, and forgiveness does not mean indifference. There is a sacred tension that exists within the nature of God, a mercy so wide it can redeem the most broken soul, and a justice so exact that it cannot overlook a single drop of cruelty. The problem is, when we suffer at the hands of others, we begin to wonder where that line lies. We question whether God's mercy to the wicked will become a betrayal of his justice toward the wounded. We look at those who hurt us, those who lied, manipulated, deceived, or abused, and we see them still laughing, still building, still breathing. And we ask, quietly or with rage, where is the justice? Why does mercy feel so unfair? But this is where we begin to understand something deeper. God is not rushed. He is not moved by our need for immediate closure. He does not act to soothe our timeline. He acts when the truth has matured, when the lies can no longer cloak themselves, when the intentions of a heart have been fully exposed. The judgment of God is not impulsive. It is deliberate, patient, and irreversible when it arrives. While the world spins forward and the guilty prosper for a time, Haven is watching with perfect clarity. The delay is not forgetfulness. The delay is mercy, and it is also a test. For the one who wounds others without repentance, mercy becomes their final chance, not their permanent shield. God offers it, not to excuse them, but to convict them. He gives time, not to erase what they've done, but to give them space to face it. He sends warnings, whispers in their conscience, moments of reflection that they may ignore. But when mercy is mocked, when grace is trampled as if it were weakness, then justice no longer delays. It descends, quietly, completely, and with a power that cannot be resisted. The ones who tore you down, who ripped your soul and thought nothing of it, they were not unseen. They were given mercy not because they deserved it, but because God is just. And justice always gives a chance before it gives a sentence. This is not a contradiction. It is perfection. What would you call a judge who sentenced without allowing the accused to repent? That would be tyranny. But what would you call a judge who never sentenced at all? That would be injustice. God is neither. Many people mistake his patience for permission. They think that because consequences are not immediate, consequences will not come. They confuse divine restraint for approval. But that is only because they do not understand how judgment walks. It walks slowly, but with purpose. It does not stumble. It does not forget the names of the guilty. It does not confuse the oppressor with the oppressed. It keeps perfect record, not for revenge, but for righteousness. And when the time is full, judgment comes in a way that no one can misinterpret. It comes not with a storm of rage, but with the stillness of certainty. Their world begins to collapse not through drama, but through undeniable loss of peace, of joy, of security. What they did in secret begins to bloom in public. What they whispered in shadows begins to echo in consequence. And you who have suffered, you are not asked to carry vengeance. That is not your burden. The judge of all the earth will do what is right, and he does not need your hatred to help him see clearly. You are asked only to trust that justice is never lost in the fog of grace. The same God who wept with you will one day act for you. His hands may be gentle in your healing, but they will be firm in their reckoning. For every act of evil, there is a moment coming when the excuse will collapse, when the mask will fall, when the mercy that was once extended will close like a door no longer open, and they will feel the weight of what they've done, not from your retaliation, but from the absence of divine protection. That is the misery that begins when mercy ends, when God no longer shields them from the outcome of their own choices, when He allows them to face what they created, not because He is cruel, but because He is just. And that justice is not something you need to force. It is already unfolding. There is a haunting irony in the lives of those who harm others without remorse. The pain they inflicted upon you did not vanish. It planted itself like a seed, an invisible one, buried deep not just in your life, but in theirs. Because evil, though it feels like power in the moment, always plants a curse in the soil of the one who wields it. The torment they caused you may have felt like the end of your story, but it was, in fact, the beginning of theirs unraveling. Misery is not always loud. It often begins in silence, in the corners of a soul that once felt untouchable, in the dreams that begin to rot, in relationships that start to wither, in the peace that slowly dies without a clear cause. That misery is not random. It is a mirror. When people choose cruelty, they think they are building something strong for themselves. They believe they are in control. They believe that if they are clever enough, if they stay ahead of the consequences, they can live untouched. But the soul is not made to house evil without breaking. What they have done to others, they carry, whether they admit it or not. The lies they told may have shattered your sense of reality for a time, but it is their own soul that will echo with confusion in the long run. They may have mocked your trust, laughed at your tears, or fed off your weakness. But what they were really doing was feeding a beast inside themselves. And beasts, when fed, do not disappear, they grow, and eventually they turn on their keeper. Misery doesn't always come in the form of ruinous tragedy. It comes in subtle but devastating forms. It appears as emptiness in places where there should be joy. It shows up as a disconnection from others, a numbness that no success can satisfy, a spiritual drought that no indulgence can fix. The person who destroyed others often finds themselves, surrounded by blessings they can no longer feel, love they can no longer access, and peace they can no longer touch. Because they didn't just hurt someone else. They damaged their own ability to experience goodness. They tore into someone else's soul, and in doing so, left an invisible tear in their own. They may still smile in pictures. They may still post achievements. But the human heart cannot be faked forever. Sooner or later, the eyes tell the truth. Sooner or later, the consequences come, not from some outside attack, but from within. Guilt becomes paranoia. The past becomes a ghost. The relationships they sabotaged become the blueprint for every new connection, until trust is no longer available to them either. What they once broke in you begins to reflect back on them like a mirror that never stops showing the truth, even when they try to look away. This is the misery that justice brings, not theatrical vengeance, not dramatic collapse, but the slow, inescapable revelation that their world is falling apart from the inside out. They can rebuild the outside 1,000 times. They can chase status, applause, romance, or distraction. But none of it will matter when the inner world becomes a prison of their own making. Because evil is not just an act against another person. It is an act against oneself. Every time they wounded you, they struck their own future. Every time they manipulated, they twisted their own path into a dead end. And this is why you do not need to wait with clenched fists or poisoned thoughts. Their misery is not your responsibility to enforce. It is already chasing them, and they cannot outrun what they've planted. God allows them time, not because He is blind, but because He is just. And in that time, they are given the opportunity to repent, to turn around, to undo what they can. But when they don't, when they continue forward without remorse, the weight of their own choices begins to fall on them like rain, slow, persistent, and unrelenting. So while they seemed powerful when they broke you, understand that their strength was a shadow, their cruelty was a debt, and the silence of heaven was not approval, it was a countdown. You may never see the fullness of their collapse. You may never hear their confession. But rest assured, what they did not end with you. It began something in them. And that beginning is a misery that does not need your help to grow. There is a holy tenderness in the way God handles the broken. When your soul has been ripped open, when you've been stripped of dignity, trust, or hope by someone else's cruelty, God does not rush past your pain to deal with their punishment. He kneels first beside you. He doesn't ignore what was done to you, but neither does He allow your healing to be overshadowed by your hunger for justice. In the eyes of heaven, your restoration comes before their reckoning. It is not that their consequences are forgotten. It's that your soul is more precious than your revenge. God is not interested in making you into a mirror of your enemy. He's interested in making you whole again. We often confuse justice with balance, assuming that something must be taken from the one who wronged us before we can receive anything back. But the ways of God are not built on human formulas. He does not need to break them further to rebuild you. He does not need to destroy someone else in order to deliver you from what they did. His healing is not a bargain. It is a gift. He moves toward your wounds with compassion, not calculation. He is not tallying your pain against their punishment. He is focusing on restoring what was stolen from your heart. You may feel that justice cannot exist until they suffer, but God knows that your freedom cannot wait for their fall. God's first movement is always toward the wounded. This is the pattern throughout history. When injustice cries out, heaven bends low. But the first act is not always judgment. It is often the laying on of divine hands to the victim. Healing is a priority because justice without healing leaves scars open and spirits bitter. God will not give you vengeance if it will poison your spirit further. His desire is not to let you relive the damage through someone else's downfall, but to lift you beyond the reach of what they did. You were not created to sit by the window of their ruin. You were created to rise into a new wholeness, where their memory no longer holds power. This does not mean God forgets. It does not mean He lets them escape. It simply means He will not let your life be defined by a courtroom you were never meant to sit in. The long process of divine justice is never at the expense of personal restoration. God sees the whole story. He knows how deeply the injury went, how silently you suffered, and how long you waited for things to make sense. And because He sees all, He knows exactly how to begin your healing. It will not always come as a grand moment of transformation, but in the quiet repair of what was torn, a thought renewed, a lie broken, a sense of safety restored. Slowly, the pieces come together, not because you fought harder, but because He did. And while this healing unfolds, God is not blind to them. He is simply not prioritizing their collapse over your rebirth. What they deserve will not vanish. It is simply not the center of His attention right now. You are. You, the one who limped away from the fire. You, the one who stayed silent because words felt like betrayal to yourself. You, the one who still struggles to believe that wholeness is possible. God leans into you first, because His justice flows from love, not rage. And love always seeks to restore before it moves to rebuke. Let it be clear, He has not forgotten what they did. He has not dismissed your pain. But He refuses to let you become a character trapped in the story of your injury. He wants you to become the author of something new. That's why He starts by healing you, by whispering peace where anxiety once screamed, by gently unraveling the lies they wrapped around your identity, by calling you by your real name again, not the name they tried to give you, worthless, broken, weak. No, He knows your true name, and He speaks it into your soul with every act of restoration. And while you are being restored, while your healing grows stronger than your hurt, God prepares what must come to those who wounded you. But He does not let your future hang on their fall. He holds it in His hands, safe, sacred, and untouched by their cruelty. He is not late. He is simply busy stitching you back together, while the thread of justice patiently moves toward its destination. Vengeance is one of the most seductive ideas the human heart can hold. When you've been wronged, deeply, unfairly, and intentionally, the desire for payback doesn't just whisper, it screams. It feels like justice. It feels like restoration. To see the one who hurt you suffer as you did seems, at times, like the only way the universe can be balanced again. But this is the great deception, because vengeance, when placed in human hands, never heals what it hopes to satisfy. It burns through the soul that carries it, leaving behind bitterness disguised as justice. This is why vengeance does not belong to us. It belongs to the hands that were pierced. There is something deeply profound about that image, hands once stretched out in surrender, wounded unjustly, bleeding for crimes not his own. Those hands know what betrayal feels like. They know abandonment. They know what it means to be struck down by those who claim to care. And yet, those same hands did not reach for a sword. They reached toward heaven. They entrusted the pain to a Father who sees all, hears all, and writes all. This is the divine paradox. Justice does not begin in retaliation. It begins in surrender. Not the surrender of justice itself, but the surrender of its weight. Because that weight is too heavy for us to carry. God is not indifferent to injustice. He is not passive in the face of evil. But he knows what we often forget, that the path to justice must be unpolluted by hate. If justice is carried out by the wounded heart, it often morphs into something darker. We start out wanting fairness, but we end up wanting revenge. We want them to hurt more than we did, to lose what we never got back, to feel the humiliation we lived through. But in this pursuit, our soul begins to resemble theirs, and that is the deepest tragedy of all. Not just that we were hurt, but that we become something we were never meant to be. This is why God commands that vengeance belongs to Him. It is not just a matter of divine authority. It is divine protection. He is shielding you from the weight of carrying out a judgment you were never designed to execute. He is preserving your soul from the corrosion of bitterness. He is keeping your identity rooted in grace, not in retaliation. Because if you allow your spirit to be ruled by revenge, then even when justice arrives, you will not feel free. You will be bound still, chained not by what they did, but by what you became in response. And God is not slow in keeping His promises. He has not turned a blind eye to your suffering. Every injustice is a seed, and each seed grows in time. He has promised that what is sown in darkness will be reaped in the light. The consequences are not your burden to engineer, they are His. He will bring them, not out of spite, but out of righteousness. He will act not to satisfy your anger, but to uphold what is true and good and unshakably just. His judgment will be clean, untainted by human resentment. And because of that, it will bring peace, not more destruction. To let go of vengeance is not to let go of justice. It is to transfer it into the hands of someone who cannot be corrupted. It is to say, "This pain is too heavy for me. You carry it, Lord." It is to trust that the cross was not only a symbol of forgiveness, but also the final word on what happens to those who mock mercy. The same God who offered grace to His enemies also promised that unrepentant evil would be dealt with, not by man's fury, but by heaven's authority. When you leave justice in God's hands, you're not becoming weak, you're becoming free. You're no longer trapped in a cycle of watching and waiting for the moment they finally fall. You're no longer consumed with proving your worth by watching their collapse. Instead, you walk forward, healed, light, unburdened, while God, in His own time and His own way, ensures that justice rolls down like a river. Not because you demanded it, but because He is just. Not because you forced His hand, but because you trusted His heart. The pierced hands will do what yours cannot, and they will do it perfectly. You were wounded deeply, unjustly, and without warning. They tore through your spirit as if your heart were disposable, as if your kindness were a weakness to be exploited. And for a time, it felt like evil won. It felt like silence was God's final answer. But what they didn't know, and what you must never forget, is that heaven never sleeps. The soul they tried to break was already in the hands of the one who heals, the one who sees every injustice and remembers every tear. God did not abandon you to your pain. He stepped into it, stitching you back together while their own lives quietly began to unravel. Their misery will not come by your hand, but by the slow and certain consequence of their own choices echoing in eternity. You do not have to carry the weight of revenge, because justice already belongs to one who judges with perfect clarity. While they laughed at your suffering, God was preparing your restoration. While they mocked your silence, heaven was writing your vindication. The pain you endured is not your prison. It is the place from which you will rise, whole, renewed, and beyond their reach. They ripped your soul open, but God has been mending you with threads of glory. And in the end, it will not be your scars that define you, but His fingerprints. Their story will be marked by the misery they birthed. Yours will be marked by the mercy that rebuilt you. That is the final word.